Welcome to our session where we're going to be discussing turning devs into data modelers and the state of the data industry as we see it today. I'm Serge Gershkovich. I'm head of product at SqlDBM, and I have with me Bill Coulam, who will give his own introduction and offer his breadth of knowledge and experience with us today. Bill?
Good morning. As Serge mentioned, Bill here. I have been involved with databases. Well, I started my career as a software engineer uh, in COBOL, which I do not put on my resume because I don't want to be hired to do it. C, C++, was doing front end stuff. Then, due to all the projects I was on that were always talking to Oracle, I found that I really loved that and moved into databases. And I've been doing data engineering and primarily data architecture for almost 3 decades now. I've been speaking at primarily Oracle, but other tech conferences since 2001. Took a bit of a break in 2018 and I've just gotten back into speaking and writing again.
Okay, fantastic. And that's exactly how I found out about one of your latest articles. And the topic seemed really relevant and kind of shook a lot of the same chords with me that I've been seeing. So I wanted to for us to get together and have this conversation because I really thought that you touched on a lot of really good points and the community in general stood to benefit from that insight. So let's maybe start with an overview of we'll get into practical advice and action plans, but let's just maybe start with an overview of what is, in your opinion, the state of data in today's enterprise companies. And now with AI on the horizon, is it helping, hurting, or not?
Yeah, my career, even from the start in the mid 90s, my career has revolved around coming into companies that had been living without any decent data modeling or design rigor for usually 10, 12, sometimes as long as 20 years. And then they realized that they had painted themselves into a corner, that their data house was a giant mess and they needed someone to come in and help them out. Um, Now, in a couple of cases, I was able to help a startup company from the get go. So we had a green field and we were able to do things right from the start. But for the most part, my career has been coming in where things were already a bit of a mess, and I was being asked to corral the cattle and bring some order to the chaos. In general, what I have seen in my own personal experience, I've actually been pretty lucky. Even though they felt like their data house was a mess, in general, I felt like their state of their data was at a 6 out of a 10. In a couple of cases, a 4 out of a 10, with a number of dumpster fires to fix. Um, I know that in a couple of other industries, for example, my best friend, he was starting a hedge fund that I helped him design the database for. And as he was demonstrating his company to investors and potential board members, they were telling him what a treasure trove that we had built. This clean data model filled with all sorts of great data that we had backfilled for and cleansed for about 12 years, I think, in the past. And they said, you don't even understand how bad the data is out there. What you've got here is absolute gold. So I've got a couple of insights from some other industries as well. But yeah, overall, from my experience, the data is in pretty poor shape. It has been neglected for a long time, and AI has shined a glaring spotlight on that as companies have been dealing with AI initiatives that have not done what they were hoped or promised they would do. And not all the time. Sometimes it's just planning and people and technology and risk assessments, things like that. But for the most part, I'd say 80% of the time, a lot of the AI initiatives have been struggling or completely failing due to the poor data that they're being fed, the poor state of the data that they have to work on. And so a lot of companies are no longer able to kick the can down the road. And so I believe that that is one of the major reasons why things like semantics, the meaning of your data, the relationships, the business rules, data definitions, what is it that we're even dealing with, data modeling and so forth, is seeing something of a renaissance and has become popular again. They just can't ignore it anymore. It felt too hard to fix their source data, and now they just can't put it off anymore. So, yeah, I think the AI is playing a really positive role in bringing awareness and lucidity back to turning to the source systems and getting that data finally in shape so that everything downstream can benefit. Sorry for that bloated
No,
answer, but
that was really complete, and you won't get any disagreement out of me here. So I might just for the sake of entertainment, because these are exact talking points most of the time. So maybe I'll just put on my devil's advocate hat and ask you the opposite questions of why data model. Tools like DBT, for example, allow a development team to just rebuild entire tables in a single command. Um, why take the time to design first instead of rebuilding if we encounter any issues, and that maybe that's an if, maybe we never encounter any issues.
yeah, yeah. Oh, by the way, I wanted to interject something that on the tail end of my last answer. I was at a tech summit 2 days ago here in Utah, put on by Utah's Association for Information Management. And they had probably 150, maybe 200 IT leaders from all over the state there, CIOs, CTOs, CDOs, had some panelists, and a number of different topics we're discussing, but it was primarily AI. And one of the panelists, his name was Brad Merlin. He's a principal solution consultant for Genesis. At one point of the panel discussion, he said, "No one has good data." And that just underlined what I had already experienced personally. And then another panelist a little bit later that day, he had given a story about their good AI implementation for customer experience, handling their call center and stuff. And at the end of this great story about their implementation of AI, the moderator asked him, "What is your number one advice to everyone here and to anyone listening to the recording of this?" Um, and I thought he was going to give some advice about vendor selection or AI tooling or something. No, his number one advice was keep your data clean, which took me back. I was really surprised that was his advice. So I wrote that down. Anyway, just to highlight what we were already talking about. Now, on your question about why data model when you've got DBT, which by the way, a lot of folks nowadays are actually confusing data modeling. If you say data model, they're thinking about the dimensional views and whatnot that you're constructing in DBT. It's like they've completely forgotten that there's a whole other element of data modeling that begins back in the system that actually ingests the data. But anyway, back to your question about why would you data model if you can reload a fact table in minutes. I, um, I would say that I can build, thinking of structures that you would want to sleep in and live in. I can build a lean-to out of sticks in about 30 minutes with an axe, some cordage, and plentiful branches. But is that the right thing to do if I'm going to be living there in all four seasons and raising a family there for 10 years? Yeah, you can quickly connect to and pipe data between a source and a data warehouse. But is that what the business needs long term? An exact replica of the faulty source table? Especially if that source table was designed poorly and there's holes and data type problems and naming problems where nobody even understands what the thing contains. If data problem, if there are poor data issues to begin with, and that's being propagated downstream and copied and pushed onto other systems, why would you duplicate that? Did modeling well, especially in this age of automation and AI, takes only a little more time than modeling terribly or not modeling at all. And when the original source, the original system that collects data, if that is done well, friction disappears all the way down the chain to the eventual analytics, data science, AI, ML, and other data consumers. So I'm not sure that I entirely understood the point of the question, but that's my first take on it.
Okay. And as you mentioned in your article, your proposal or your solution to get around the problem of data quality is effectively turning developers into data modelers.
Yes.
So maybe two-part question. What is the distinction between a developer and a modeler? And how would you define data modeling for somebody, let's say, who's technical? Let's take one of these DBT analytics engineers who says, yeah, I use DBT, I data model. How do you explain to them what do you actually mean by data modeling?
Okay. Well, I would hope that for most listening in that the distinction between a developer and data modeler is pretty clear. But for those that are maybe new to this world, a developer or software engineer is someone who writes code that gives the computer's instruction to display an application on your laptop or desktop or your phone and give, well, it doesn't always have a UI component. Sometimes it's a faceless, backend component, but there's always code that is being written to provide an interface of some sort, either faceless or with a face, like a UI that a consumer is used to, that gathers data from some input, either a human or an automated system, and then processes that data. Most often, that data is put into a database so that it can be saved. Otherwise, it's very ephemeral and temporal and will disappear shortly because it's only in memory. And because that data is typically recorded in a database, you want to have a nicely structured place to put it. Uh, think of a home where everyone that comes in the house just dumps everything that they brought in from the car onto a table in the middle of the kitchen, which is a little bit more like NoSQL databases, versus a home that has some nice little cubby holes and some cupboards and some spots that are labeled, Tom, Dick, and Jane, and this is where you put your stuff, and the keys go here and so forth. You've got a nice place for everything to go.
Oh, wow.
Everyone
I've
knows where
been
it
living
goes.
in a NoSQL database this whole time and I didn't even know it. I'd love to move
Yeah,
to a data modeling neighborhood. And
that's the distinction between a developer and a data modeler. A data modeler builds that structure in a database in order for the data to have a nice, clean home uh, for it to rest, where it can be pulled at a moment's notice to do something else with. Um,
so how do you discern between an engineer and a data modeler? So not necessarily a programmer, developer, but a data modeler and someone who just works with data on at the surface level.
yeah, this is might be a little bit new for some of your audience who have maybe started in this field in the last 10 years. There used to be a clear distinction. There was a group of folks at larger enterprises who handled all of the data modeling for all of the systems being built by the engineers and developers in the company. And they would have to wait sometimes weeks to months to get a data modeler out of the data model out of the data modeling or data architecture group in order to proceed with their development of the software or the system they were working on. Then about 2007, 2010, DBAs and data modelers, partly because of the impediment that they used to impose upon the enterprise because of the bottleneck that they were, and partly because new sexy technologies like NoSQL databases and object relational mappers and cloud and whatnot, those things all took center stage. And data modelers, data architects, folks that were focused on data kind of disappeared for a while. And it's only with the advent of AI that this has come about again. Now, a data modeler is really a rare breed, unless you're a really large enterprise, big federal branch of the government, that sort of thing. Um, Someone who just does data modeling is a little rarer nowadays.
But yeah, I would say not that rare because I think we're, depending on your perspective, for example, as a consultant, you might be seeing kind of you're called in when businesses and organizations really need the help of an experienced architect. Whereas
Yeah,
from my perspective, I kind of have a little bit of I see the survivorship bias. So when I speak to clients at SqlDBM, which tend to be larger enterprise companies, I'm kind of already seeing the best of the breed, kind of where they do, like exactly like you said, they do have dedicated architects, or usually a team of them that are responsible for different parts of the business, laying down standards, which is ostensibly a much easier environment to operate in because you have governance that's top down.
hmm
And even if somebody junior were to join, or someone without a background, they would be very quickly taken up into the fold of best practices, which is kind of what we want to talk about today, the
hmm
shift left paradigm. And again, a two-part question. What is shift left? And can you talk about it in the context of where most data teams find themselves, which is the front line between the business and all of the upstream data quality issues? So
yeah,
let's say there is not a data model anywhere to be found, and yet the data team doesn't necessarily own the source system. So they may just be just as blind as anyone. And how do we begin modeling in such a scenario? How do we begin to shift left?
yeah. Uh, Both to finish answering the last question and to answer this one, in the interim between the 2010 and then today, data engineers really took center stage in the data world, especially because so many companies wanted to move to the cloud. Data engineers became absolutely essential, uh, coming in and doing software development, but for data, to move data out of source systems into the cloud. And very frequently, they had to write code to do loading, transformation, get it into the data warehouse. And then about 2015, Snowflake burst onto the scene. At least that's when my good friend got hired to be their evangelist. It might have been shortly after that they became so popular. But yeah, what's that?
Was that Kent Graziano?
Yeah, that was Kent.
Yeah, he's
Um,
a good friend of ours as well.
yeah, great guy. I've been working with him for a long time since we were on the RMUG board together in Denver. But yeah, cloud data warehouses became a big deal. And the next thing you knew, data modelers and architects just hadn't been seen in a while. Data engineers were the primary people working with data, and they didn't really have ownership of the data. Really, their job was to move the data into the data warehouse for downstream analytics and data science. And yet, the business, because modelers and other people, whose careers focused on data were gone, they were turning to the data engineers to focus, not to focus, to get answers to their questions on what the data meant, where it came from, where's the sensitive fields to comply with certain, security regulations, and so forth. And the data engineers didn't own the data. I mean, because they worked with it day in, day out, they often knew more than most, but they didn't have the information they needed. And this is where folks like Chad Sanderson and his eventual business companion, Mark Freeman, started writing heavily about the dire state of data and why we desperately needed to move ownership and governance and documentation of data meaning back to the data producers, which, if you look at a chart of the software development lifecycle, is the far left side, where the data is actually ingested through the applications, APIs, and so forth. And so for, I don't know, about 2010, maybe a little bit earlier to about 2021, 2022, all the money and focus of enterprises were hoping that their data problems would finally go away if they pumped enough into the back end systems, the ELT systems, ETL systems, the um, data warehouses, all the things that lived on that side of things, which is the far right of what you would call the data lifecycle. And so, anyway, Chad and others were calling for a return to good and decent data governance, data documentation, data modeling, as far left in the data and software development life cycle as you can get it. That term goes back as far as 2001 when Larry Smith coined shift left testing in the Dr. Dobbs journal. Boy, I haven't seen that rag in a long time. Um, but that torch was taken up by DevOps and DevSecOps in the 2013-2015 timeframe to call for organizations to focus more on testing and fixing earlier for security and operations. And then recently, about 2023, 24, this concept of shifting left was taken up by the data community. Not all of it, but it's a growing movement. It started again by Chad Sanderson and Mark Freeman. I was part of the original founding cohort of 40. It grew to about 200. Um, Chad published his Shift Left Data Manifesto in March of 2025, so it's really quite new. And then we have I should say it, um, was mothballed just last week, but we had a Slack community where we were meeting biweekly and commiserating and sharing wisdom, and it was really great. Chad and his group got a little bit too busy with the advent of the book that they wrote on data contracts and the business, the Gable.ai that they're running. And so that just recently suffered a bit of a hiccup. Um, but yeah, shift left data means finding the root cause of data quality and data governance problems instead of transforming, filling, and masking over problems in sanitized models in the data warehouse or lakehouse or the BI semantic model.
Where do I sign? How do I sign up? Because that sounds incredible. And the trouble that I've often seen in teams is that in most virtually all organizations, the data team is a cost center. They're not
Yeah.
directly contributing to revenue.
Mm-hmm.
Sales teams are other product and things that contribute to the bottom line, profit centers, which tend to be the clients or the consumers of data. And again, the data team, like you said, does not own the data. They move the data, they transform the data, they make it pretty for consumption. But it also means that they're the front line, and it doesn't matter where the data quality issue originates in the source system, maybe in a third party system that's being contracted for information as master data or something. It's ultimately the data team's fault and job, and they get blamed. So
Mm-hmm.
how how do you recommend beginning the shift left journey when the data team itself is often not responsible or accountable, or they're accountable, sorry, they're not responsible for the issue. But how do they make downstream teams feel what really should be responsibility? It's not a mandate, it's more of let's all do a better job here.
Yeah, I thought about this a lot. I have been lucky in that I've been called in to help organizations that already know that they're in a world of pain. So I haven't had to convince anyone, and that has kind of skewed my perspective on this. But I have been reading, attending boot camps, articles left and right for the last 10 years on data governance. And it's kind of an icky term. Nobody likes the word governance because it sounds like you're being controlled. I prefer to call it data trust. Um, but data governance is all about owning your data, having someone who can make decisions about it, knowing what the data actually means, where it came from, and so forth. And organizations have found over and over and over again that data governance or data trust programs do not work unless you have executive sponsorship. So you can attempt a grassroots effort to convince the business that they need to move good data governance, data curation, data modeling to the data producers, to the software engineers and developers, and those who gave them their marching orders, product and their leaders. But that's going to be a very difficult task. I don't really know how to set a fire under an organization that doesn't know that its data is not well defined, not well managed. It's got holes, data integrity problems. So I
To to terms with it.
I would say the best advice I would have for an organization that doesn't already know that is to quantify it. The data engineers are already overloaded, but if they or the analytics team or the data science team or the executives know that their data is not consistent, reliable, there's problems, to start quantifying it so that it can be exposed, so that they can know that they're in a world of hurt, to invite someone like myself or yourself to come in and establish those standards and give some order and some rigor and get the house in order.
I've made a similar case earlier that engineers need to learn how to speak the language of the business, which tends to be just business metrics and KPI and the language of money ultimately. So
Mm-hmm.
it's only when you quantify what your time is being spent on, because the engineering team doesn't grow in response to data quality issues. If anything, quite the opposite. But if you can do a simple task of just classifying Jira tickets by new feature versus bug fix and present that to your stakeholders and say, look at what 50% or 60 or 80% of our time is being spent on, that might help get your point across as a first step. So
Mm-hmm.
getting back to your article, which talked about turning developers into modelers. So you actually recommend some concrete steps on how to do that. So can you give an
Yeah,
overview
yeah,
and then we can maybe dive into some of those?
yeah. Because of that big gap, as I was saying, between around 2007 about 2021, where data modeling and data architecture kind of lost its glitter. A lot of organizations don't have that, or if they do have that capability still, those people are heavily overloaded. So what I have been doing for the last, I could even argue I've been doing it since 2007, but let's say since 2018, I've been helping organizations modernize. They were already modernizing in terms of getting off of big bloated monoliths into microservices in the cloud and so forth. But they were usually choosing to get off of legacy database technology. This is just my experience, not everybody's, right? They were usually choosing to get off of Oracle and moving to Postgres and MongoDB. And it was my job to train engineering teams on how to use Postgres well and how to fix the mistakes of the past. And so for the last 7 years, I've been coming in, uh, and this is really what my article talks about, and it talks about it in this order. I bring with me a set of standards and guidelines and training manuals, really, for anyone who is doing software development to learn how to do data modeling well. And I found that they're eager for this. Most of the time, they've been living without any sort of standard, and they've been having to make stuff up as they go. They're actually grateful to have a little checklist that they can go over to make sure that their designs are good. And of course, this is after, as I said before, the organization already knows they're in a world of hurt. They hire me, I come in, and I let them know, okay, we're going to be decentralizing or federating data modeling among all of your microservice teams, um, so that they can be, because there's no way that one person, can do all the modeling for all those teams. There's just too few of us. And so they already know that that's what I'm shooting for. So I come in, establish those guidelines and standards, get those on a network drive, or a shareable space, usually Confluence, sometimes Azure, AD, I think that was the name of it. But it's usually Atlassian products, so that all the developers can get to it. And then I go about training them. Um, Usually start with some brown bags. I work with the engineering teams to make sure it's mandatory. We'll do just 2 or 3 of these to begin with, so that they know where they can find these resources. We do some basic training in data modeling, and and then we let them fly. I also establish a gate. There's a little bit of gatekeeping to begin with. We'll usually interject a step in their CI/CD processes to make sure that nothing goes to staging, or prod until it has had data architecture review. That is me to begin with. And I make sure that I get those pull requests reviewed within 10 to 30 minutes. And that is absolutely key. Once they know that I'm not an impediment, uh, getting in the way of their pull request, making it to merge status, they trust me a lot more. And we start working together. In the initial few months, as they're working through the checklist and making sure that their PRs are good before they submit it for review, sometimes they'll miss some things, and I'll do a little bit of instruction, pointing out where where in the checklist this was found, the thing that they missed, or if it's a little bit nuanced, we'll actually go and talk with them in person. And with that, I'll gain a lot of, uh, I don't know, my reputation gets good after I've consulted with them on a few issues. And they start bringing me in as new microservices are born. They'll bring me in to consult with them. And after about 6 to 8 months or so, they no longer need me. They're now asking all the right questions up front when they get a new project on their plate. They're doing good data analysis on their
Sure.
own.
And can you give us an idea of what you're looking for in those reviews? What is the minimum bar that somebody would have to clear to get your stamp of approval initially?
Yeah, there are 13 points. I probably can't rattle them all off, but they're the basics, like having a surrogate key. We talk about the data type for that surrogate key, protecting your data with data integrity constraints, check constraints where it makes sense. If you're going to have a Boolean, make sure that it is not null, that it has a default. Um, the very top one, and I say at the top of the checklist, these items are listed in order of importance. And the very top item on the checklist is make sure that your data asset, be it a table or a view, is well documented with all the tribal knowledge that you have at this time, working with products, going through requirements, working with stakeholders. What do you know about this data entity now? Because 5 years from now, nobody's going to know, and it's going to be hard to dig up that knowledge, as well as every data attribute in that data entity. Document it well now. And so it's looking for table and column comments. Um, there are a number of other things, like a little bit of guidance about audit columns, and so forth, but they're just the basics of what a good, clean data model should have. And these things could potentially be automated. Uh, I, I haven't done software engineering for such a long time yet. I have, I guess that's my excuse, but I really should be using AI myself to get an agent on this so it gets triggered when a PR data architecture review request comes in and it goes to the checklist on its own. But I prefer having a human pair of eyes on those requests, especially during those first few months of getting engineers used to data modeling. There's enough personal mentoring that needs to take place that I really like to have a pair of human eyes on it. Maybe later we could automate the whole thing. Um,
Yeah, and plus everything you're describing is not going out of your way. It's having the context already in people's minds to have done it right the first time. It doesn't require any extra effort. It requires the thing that you're already doing to be done consistently and accurately.
yeah, and if they've been given a little bit of guidance about how to data model well, in general, I find that they're producing data models every bit as good as I would have done within 3 months. I mean, I've had some developers, they were doing awesome within a month. And then others take a little bit longer, but good data modeling and good SQL is honestly not that hard.
Yeah.
Um,
And it's contagious once you
yeah,
see it.
yeah, and absolutely. And once they've been doing this for a little while, they see how much more robust their data structures are, how bug counts go down. They see the value in it. Initially consulting with me and then later doing that analysis and design on their own, they see that overall they just produce so much better software, often quicker than they were before. And about the only thing they've had to do differently is apply a little bit of that knowledge of data modeling and actually document what they're, what the data structures they're designing. And honestly, in just the last few months, that's gone a whole lot better at my current company, where we have 60 systems we need to document because they weren't done before I came on. And they're using AI to generate a lot of that data documentation. And it's doing a really amazing job. There's only a few fields here and there that they'd have to curate and document some exceptions and some nuances. But um, even for companies where they haven't been documenting for years, they can now use AI to make that a much smoother experience. And that's actually built into a number of data governance tools as of the last year or two. So really, companies have no excuse anymore to not document their data.
Okay, so design standards and audit reviews are is just one of the steps, but you actually talk about four steps in turning developers into data modelers. Can you talk
Yeah,
about the
yeah.
other three?
Sorry. Yeah, the very first step was establishing those standards so that they have a reference to turn to when they want to seek information on their own, or they can't remember what was on the checklist. It's there. It's typically in Confluence. They can turn to it. Easy to find. That's the first step. The second step, we talked about it. That's training them in data modeling. Some of that personal touch to begin with, brown bags, sitting with them, letting them, give you shoulder taps, catch you on Slack and so forth. So that's the training and mentoring piece. The third piece we also already talked about, which is the data architecture reviews. And that's just really to make sure that everyone's on board and doing a great job. They're following the checklist. They're becoming great data modelers. And as I mentioned, that usually takes 1 to 3 months. After 6 months, the whole organization is rolling smoothly. And now I, as a data architect, can turn my attention to bigger issues like master data management, data governance, data security, and so forth. So that's the third one is the gate to make sure that nothing makes it into production that hasn't been modeled and documented well. And then the fourth step, which is finally answering your question, is programmatically making sure that these good data designs stay that way, that people don't change things in the data producing systems that break things downstream. And that's where Chad Sanderson and uh, his acolytes, his company, his he and Mark Freeman's new book on data contracts come in. And honestly, I can't speak heavily to that because I haven't done very much of it myself. My organization is just starting to adopt that. Their book, by the way, I think was just barely released. It's an O'Reilly book, so I recommend that. And there are some authors out there. Uh, oh, I meant to get his name. There's one, he's been putting a bunch of articles out on Medium about using YAML to fully document the stuff that data governance normally tracks, lineage, ownership, meaning, and so forth.
Is it Jan or John? Is that the guy I'm thinking of?
Yeah, his articles are about using that metadata in YAML to automatically generate uh, data model diagrams, which I meant to mention somewhere in this conversation. Data model diagrams are awesome. A picture is worth 1,000 words. And when you get a data model diagram in front of business people, stakeholders, product managers, and so forth, it really assists and aids in conversation. It helps you grasp the system very quickly. Data model diagrams are awesome. I would love everyone to start using them more heavily.
Yes, as head of product at SqlDBM, you won't find any argument there from me, obviously. And I would also point out that back to our point of it not requiring any extra work, these are two sides of the same coin that we're talking about. Data structure, DDL, and ERD are just different representation of the same body of knowledge of having done that analysis and having done the effort of documenting something. You can view it as a diagram. You can this yeah display it as SQL or DDL. So, in the interest of time, since we're almost up on the hour, I want to ask you what first of all, what keeps you up at night? What are your challenges and passions right now in the data space?
Um, Given that I have used so much of the last 20 years uh, trying to educate both organizations and software engineering in how SQL, well, database architecture, SQL and stored routine design, and data modeling is really not that hard to do well. One of the things that keeps me up at night is education. I've it, it's my perspective, it's my opinion that since about 2010, universities who have been giving us our young software engineers have not been training them enough in data. They typically have one or two classes in data design. It usually uses MongoDB as their primary database that they experiment with. They're maybe dealing with a data set of 10,000 rows, and they come out of university thinking, okay, I've got data down. I know all about it now. And they call themselves a full stack engineer. But there's so much more to data and to doing data well. I know I said it's easy. It is, but I think that education has been pretty much dropped at a lot of educational institutions. So that's something that worries me a lot. And I think that
Yeah,
the
that was my exact experience in college.
yeah, I think the pipelines that are giving us our software engineers could do the business world a big favor by making sure that they understand data a lot better, um, and have worked with data sets of at least 10 million rows, if not more. Um, at my current company, we've got some tables that are upwards of half a trillion rows, and it's a whole different world when what you can do with data in a certain amount of time and so forth. Testing is different when your tests take 3 hours, and it's just a whole different world when you're dealing with big data. So that's something that keeps me up at night. Of course, just data volumes in general, uh, and and the nuances of having to work with big data. It's really challenging. It's exciting. It's fun, but there are times when you're trying to figure out how to keep a system up 24/7 and still migrating a new data structure. That's what keeps you up at night. But
Absolutely. And where universities are failing the youth, you are picking up the mantle and you're doing your best to do some of that educational content. So as a final question, can you let people know where to find your work, how to keep up with the latest and what you're doing, and to stay in touch?
oh, sure. I finally got off my hindquarters and built a couple of websites. Now it's called dbsherpa.com. It's mainly a collection of all of my presentations from the last 20 years. But most of my writing right now is going on Substack and my blog, which is datasherpa.blog. So I have dbsherpa.com and datasherpa.blog.
It's all right. We'll provide the links to all of these in the description, so don't worry about having to spell them out. Fantastic. Okay, Bill, thank you so much. I think this has been just a wealth of knowledge for folks that are still learning these lessons the hard way. And I really appreciate your time. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's really fun talking to others about training developers on how to be good data modelers. So